Welcome to Sermons in the Park, a ministry exploring biblical truth from the Word of God, focusing on the truths that help us in our daily walk with Christ in every aspect of our lives. Now, here is your Reverend, Jamie McCaskill.
Alrighty, get over here, get this all up. Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome back to an all-new Sermons in the Park. As always, I am your Reverend Jamie McCaskill. I want to take this time, like I do each and every week, just to say thank you for joining me here. It's a blessing to be able to stand here in front of all of you on these beautiful Sundays and deliver the Lord's message to you, and either on YouTube, BitChute, Rumble, or over on the podcast, wherever you consume our sermons here. Join us if you will. So let's bow our heads and thank our Heavenly Father for the great and wonderful gifts that He's given us. Heavenly Father, we come to you like we do each Sunday, but Lord, we should do it every day, right? We should come to you in the mornings, in the evenings, at night, all throughout the day, just to tell you thank you for everything that you do. You give us food, you give us water, you give us air, you give us everything. Everything that we use, everything that we enjoy is a gift from you. And we just want to say thank you for that. We want to thank you for your word that we consume here each week on Sermons in the Park. I want to thank you for the Bible, just in all of its great and wonderful joys and everything. It's amazing, and we love you for it. We thank you because we know that's your love letter to us. We want to thank you for your law, which shows us how we've fallen short so we can know that we can do better. Your son Jesus came to die so we could have that closer relationship with you, so we can be forgiven for breaking your law. We love him, we love you, we love everything, Father, everything you do for us. So thank you. In the name of your son Jesus. Amen. Now, if this is by some chance your first time joining us, I want to first off welcome to Sermons in the Park. I hope you decide to stay around and join our little family here. But second off, I want to invite you to, before you get any further, I want to invite you to pause this video, podcast, whatever, wherever you're viewing this, and go back, find the first one wherever you are, and get yourself caught up. Come on back, because I promise you, if you pause, by the time you come back, we'll be right here waiting on you. We will not have moved any further. So, this week, what we do here is we do a book by book, chapter by chapter, verse by verse breakdown of the entire Bible. And currently we are in Genesis, right? We are in Genesis, and this week we're on chapter 33. And so we're literally continuing on from where we were last week, because this week we're finally seeing that confrontation that we've all been waiting for. We're seeing that confrontation between Jacob and his brother Esau. As we see here at the beginning of this chapter, we see Esau, it literally says Esau came. I want you to remember a while back in chapter 31, we read, right, that Jacob had did something. He had divided his family into 3 different groups, okay? And then he went ahead of them, and he did that so he could go meet Esau. Now, the fact that he divided his family, you know, and not only that he divided them, but how far of a distance that he put between them shows us something. Because what he was doing was, it shows that he favored them over himself. So let us go ahead and read. We're in Genesis chapter 33. We're going to read the entire chapter, verse 1 to verse 20. It says, "And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau came, and with him 400 men, and he divided the children unto Leah and unto Rachel and unto the 2 handmaids. And he put the handmaids and their children foremost, and Leah and her children after, and Rachel and Joseph hindermost. And he passed over before them, and bowed himself to the ground 7 times, until he came near to his brother. And Esau ran to meet him, and embraced him, and fell on his neck, and kissed him, and they wept. And he lifted up his eyes, and saw the women and the children, and said, Who are those with thee? And he said, The children which God has graciously given thy servant. Then the handmaidens came near, they and their children, and they bowed themselves. And Leah also with her children came and bowed themselves. And after came Joseph near, and Rachel, and they bowed themselves. And he said, What meanest thou by all this drove which I met? And he said, These are to find grace in the sight of my Lord. And Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep that thou hast unto thyself. And Jacob said, Nay, I pray thee, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then receive my present at my hand. For therefore I have seen thy face, and though I had seen the face of God, and thou wast pleased with me, take, I pray thee, my blessing, that is brought to thee, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. And he urged him, and he took it. And he said, Let us take our journey, and let us go, and I will go before thee. And he said unto him, My Lord knowest that the children are tender, and the flocks and herds with young are with me. And if men should overdrive them one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant, and I will lead on softly, according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure, until I come unto my Lord, unto Seir. And Esau said, Let me now leave with thee some of the flocks that are with me. And he said, What needeth it? Let me find grace in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way into Seir, and Jacob journeyed to Succoth, and built him a house, and made booths for his cattle. Therefore the name of the place is called Succoth. And Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Paddan Aram, and pitched his tent before the city. And he brought a parcel of a field where he had spread his tents at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And he erected there an altar, and called it El Elohi Israel. Now, what we always do is we go back and we read that first verse that we read, and we break it down, right? So verse 1, what do we read? And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau came, and with him 400 men, and he divided the children unto Leah, and unto Rachel, and unto the 2 handmaids. It starts off with what? It says, and Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked. If you've been listening to our podcast here long enough, you know that the Bible was not originally divided into chapters. Okay, it was originally one long book, just like any book. There was no chapters, there was no verses, it just was a book, right? The story would have just continued on. So last week we saw Jacob do what? He crossed over the brook, right? So we see that after he passed over that brook and was back with his wife and children, which was either done on accident or maybe on purpose, we don't know, he saw his brother coming, right? Now, some believe that this shows cheerfulness. It shows courage, that he was not distressed or dejected in any way. Now, the verse goes on to say, and behold, Esau came, and with him 400 men. We read about that last week. The verse goes on to say, and he divided the children into Leah, and into Rachel, and into the handmaids. Now, I read that some people actually believe that he made them into 4 different divisions, right? Now, meaning Leah had her children, and they were in a group. Rachel, she had her son, Bilhah with hers, Zilpah with hers. But still, others, including myself, are of the opinion that, there were just 3 groups. That the two handmaids, they were together with their children in one division. Leah, she had her children in another one, and then Rachel had her own son, Joseph, in the third one. Like I said, I believe this one because of what we read in the next verse. Read on with me. And he put the handmaids and their children foremost, and Leah and her children after, and Rachel and Joseph hindermost. Do you see? It says, and he put the handmaids and their children foremost, meaning first. Now, looking at them, we see that the first division, which you could say is the less honorable one, the less beloved, and then it says Leah and her children after. Again, if you look at it in a way of honor, so we had the least favorite first, and then here we are, we see where they stood. Now, don't forget, he didn't choose Leah. She was forced on him by Laban. And then we see, and Rachel and Joseph hindermost. Both of them are the ones that Jacob loved more, right? So he's being extra careful with them. Rachel, she was the principal wife. She was the one that he chose, his lawful wife. So she got the greatest share of the affection, as we already know. And Joseph was her son. Like I said earlier, with this order, we can see which one Jacob loved the most. We see the handmaids and their children, right? They have the greatest share of the danger, and then you have Leah and her children, and then lastly Jacob sent Rachel and Joseph, the ones that have been protected the most. They're at the rear of this caravan, if you will, and of course Jacob, he was in the worst danger of all of them. We then see the next couple of verses that Jacob, he fearfully, respectfully approaches his brother in the way that someone who's inferior would approach, an honored patron. We see Esau gladly and eagerly. He runs in to greet his brother, no restraint on his emotions at all. We also see that they wept. Remember, these two brothers, they've been apart for over 20 years. All those old memories, they're wiped away. Those murderous threats, they're in the past. Their hearts had changed, and we see them do what? They reconcile. Let's go to verse 3 now. And he passed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. It starts off with, and he passed over before them. What's that say? He walks up. He puts himself in front. The most danger. He's the master of the family. He's the one in the most danger, like I said. He's ready to protect his family, to defend them the best way that he could. Or maybe even to hopefully soften his brother's mind, when he addresses him, if he's able to. He took no chances at all. And when he saw Esau, the verse says that he bowed himself to the ground 7 times. This is only done to show homage, right? Something that is usually done to a kind, like the Amarna tablets tell us, and the 2 feet of my Lord the King 7 times, and 7 times I fell. Right here, Jacob is bowing down 7 times. A civil way of doing this. It's a way, it's done, this is actually done in the Eastern countries as a way of showing great honor. Notice, he's doing this to Esau. Esau, who was the older brother. He's doing it like Esau is superior to him. More grand, more wealthy. He is also lord of a considerable country, isn't he? Now, at the same time, religious adoration can be made to God. He wanted Esau to see that he's humble. And again, for you numerology buffs out there, we're seeing 7. He bows how many times? 7. And as we all know, if you've been following me long enough, because I constantly bring this one up, 7 is a sign of completion, spiritual completion. Verse 4. And Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. It starts off with what? And Esau ran to meet him. Now I want you to think about that, because see, Esau, he'd been riding on something. He'd been riding on a camel, either that or a horse. There's no way that he just walked that whole way, okay? No, he didn't do that. If he did, he must have just dove off of it, off this horse or this camel or whatever. When he saw Jacob, he was so happy to see his brother. He was so ready to show his, that he basically he ran over to meet him, like the father did with the prodigal son. Remember that? I want you to take a look with me. Luke chapter 15, verse 20. I'm having to step over a little bit further, guys, because it's nighttime, so the living room's a little bit darker. Jesus says, and he arose and came to his father, but when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. The verse says, and embraced him, doesn't it? He wrapped his brother in his arms with the greatest respect, the greatest tenderness. The verse says, and fell on his neck. He laid his head on his neck. And you know what? I'm sure he held on to him for a while. He laid his head there, unable to lift it, unable to even speak. Now, you can't tell here in this verse, but when you look at the original, it is in the dual numbers. And as Ben Melech says, that means both sides of his neck. Both sides, the right and the left. He laid his head on one side, and then he came back and he laid his head on the other side. He showed his brother the greatest affection. The verse goes on to say, and he kissed him. Now, to Jacob's submission to him, his obedience to divine protection, he had the power with God, right? He now also had power with men. He had prayer, and now he had the power of men because of his brother here, just like he should. The verse says, and they wept, both of them wept. The Septuagint actually makes it very clear, because it actually adds to it both Jacob and Esau, because of how they felt. They were so happy seeing each other. And I bet you that Jacob, he was so happy to have this reconciliation, even if it was just on the outside. Him and his wives and his children, we're seeing them all spared here. Don't forget, it's been 20 years since these two brothers saw each other. I bet you Esau, he didn't even know that his brother was still alive. Because just imagine the joy they both must have felt when they saw each other. There were tears of joy. And in Jacob's case, also relief. You see, our worst fears, they so rarely happen. Jacob, he had feared his brother for no reason. Esau, he didn't mean him any harm. I don't care what some preachers tell you, because I heard a preacher one time say that Esau was hugging him, looking for a soft place to stick his dagger. The Bible doesn't tell us that. When you read this, there's no hint of this. Anyway, let's move on. Verse 5. Bye-bye, I'm doing my video. And Esau ran to meet him and embraced him. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the women and the children, and said, who are those with thee? And he said, the children which God hath graciously given thy servant. So Esau, it says, he lifted up his eyes, he saw the women and the children. So after he'd hugged his brother, he'd greeted him, right? He looks up, And he sees all the women and the children there, all of them, the 2 wives, the handmaidens, the 12 children. Because remember, at this time, Benjamin, he hasn't been born yet. The verse says, and said, who art those with thee? So he asks him, who are these women and children that are with you, brother? Because so far, Jacob, he hadn't mentioned them. Even when he sent the messengers. So that's why he's asking about them. And we see Jacob answer him. Jacob says, and he said, the children which God hath graciously given thy servant. I love this line right here. So many of us can learn from this line right here, because Jacob says, what? That the children are gifts of God. He uses it as a way to pledge his favor and his goodwill to Esau, and he acknowledges it. Notice, he also speaks respectfully to his brother. Even though he says that he is his brother's servant, he doesn't say anything about his wives. Now, he's not ashamed of them. Not like Abernell suggests, okay? He's not ashamed that he has 4 wives. He only mentions the children because they are the ones that are kin to Esau. Not to mention, because of this, I'm sure Esau, he could deduce who these women were. And anyway, who's to say that he doesn't mention them? It's very possible that he did, and that we just don't see it in the biblical record. Also, don't forget this. Rachel and Leah are also cousins of Esau. I'm sure there's no doubt that he knew about this. Okay, we see them pay him respect in the next verse, but of course Esau, he did not know about the marriages or the family. They had a lot to talk about. Okay, so much had happened in those 20 years. And again, I want to point this out. Jacob thanks God for everything. Okay, verse 6 now. Then the handmaidens came near, they and their children, and they bowed themselves. It says, then the handmaidens came near, they and their children. Why? Well, because they were the ones that were closest. Remember, Bilhah and her 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali, and then there was, Zilpah and her 2 sons, Gad and Asher, right? The verse says, and they bowed themselves. They showed respect to Esau. Just like they saw Jacob do just moments ago, setting an example. He probably told them to as well, Okay, so verse 7. And Leah also with her children came near and bowed themselves. And after came Joseph near and Rachel, and they bowed themselves. It says, and Leah also with her children came near and bowed themselves. So like I said, going in order here, Leah and her children would be next. Her and her 7 children. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah. If you're keeping count, that is 6 sons and a daughter. All right, the verse then says, and after came Joseph near and Rachel, and they bowed themselves. Did you notice that Joseph is mentioned first? Now, that could be because he was first in the procession, for greater safety. Or maybe she presented him to his uncle, like, hey, go see your uncle. Because remember, he was 6. Maybe she did it as a way to teach him respect, right? Now, are you keeping count? That's 4 women, 11 sons, a very large family, right? Verse 8. And he said, what meanest thou by all this drove with which I... And he said, what meanest thou by all this drove which I met? And he said, these are to find grace in the sight of my Lord. Look at that. Look at that. Esau says, what meanest thou by all this drove which I met? Now, I want you to make sure you don't get this one wrong, okay? He's not ignorant of the design, because there's no doubt that the people had let him know about it, just like Jacob told them to. I think what we're seeing here is he's wanting to hear it from his brother's own mouth. This would have also given him a chance to refute it, right? And the verse says, and he said, these are to find grace in the sight of my Lord. He's trying to gain favor, right? He's trying to gain goodwill. Remember, these were also a token of Jacob's goodwill, because it was a custom in the East at the time to give a gift to a friend, especially if he's a great man, when you would visit them. They still do that to this day, so don't get me wrong when I say this. It was, because they still do it today. Okay, verse 9. And Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep that thou hast unto thyself. I love this verse right here, okay? Because it says, and Esau said, I have enough, my brother. I love this, because he tells Jacob, I have a lot already. He doesn't need anything else, right? Maybe he even has more than Jacob does, for all we know. He says, keep that thou hast unto thyself. He sees how large his brother's family is, right? So he tells him, keep it for yourself. Keep it for your family. What does this show us? Because you see, again, think about that earlier where I told you there are preachers who preach that Esau's wanting to stab his brother in the back. This right here shows us he's not covetous at all. He's happy. He's happy to have this reconciliation with his brother. He didn't need anything. When you look at this, he sees a large gift. He's just surprised by it. That's why he asks, why did you send it? And Jacob told him. He sent it so that he wouldn't be angry with him. You see, Esau had been blessed by God with wealth. And he tells him, keep the gifts. I have a lot already. Verse 10. And Jacob said, nay, I pray thee, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then receive my present at my hand, for therefore I have seen thy face, and though I had seen the face of God, and thou wast pleased with me. At the opening of this verse, okay, we see, and Jacob said, nay, I pray thee. The Targum of Jonathan has it say, do not say so, or do not refuse my gift. A bit more clear to us modern speakers, isn't it? And then it says, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then receive my present at my hand. This, of course, makes it clear that when he accepted the gifts, Jacob would take that as a sign, and it would satisfy him. That, Esau is also showing goodwill. And that he was no longer, resentful towards him. Now, interestingly enough, we read a comparison here. Because it says, thy face, and then the face of God. Jacob is just acknowledging that it was God that changed Esau. He saw Esau's face. He saw that it showed there was no hate, that there was only brotherly love there. And this is contrary to what I heard once, where some preachers were saying that it was just Esau looking for an opportunity to stick a knife in Jacob's back. Okay? Jacob could see that God was working on Esau's heart, causing him to carry love in him. He's telling him to take the gifts because he could see the love in him. He says, and thou wast pleased with me. That Esau had accepted him, had received him kindly. He was happy. Because you see, Esau is not angry with him. He tells his brother, keep the gifts. He could feel that God had indeed, forgiven him and made everything right. With Esau, The two, they saw no fault in each other. All right, verse 11. Take, I pray thee, my blessing, that is brought to thee, because God hath dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. And he urged him, and he took it. So verse 11 starts off with, take, I pray thee, my blessing that is brought to thee. Now that blessing is, of course, talking about that gift, those gifts, plural, that he sent to him. Remember that? We spoke about that last week. You see, he sent them to his home, right? And those were, of course, blessings on Jacob from God. And Jacob, being as generous as he was, he gave them to his brother. He wanted the blessing from God to go along with it. Now, this, to me, at least, is insinuating that he wants Esau to take it. He's hoping that he would be happy and prosperous. And then we read, because God hath dealt graciously with me. This is, of course, talking about how God had given him, so much. And had not now given him favor in the eyes of his brother, Esau. He had dreaded this moment. Remember? This verse says, and because I have enough. Jacob, he had enough of all these good things. He was content. He was happy. You could take it as him saying, I have everything. Meaning, all kinds of good things. Because he did. He had everything that he needed, right? This is stronger than what Esau had said. And it's also true, you see. Jacob, he had a much larger share in the temporal blessings, okay? As well as the spiritual blessings. God was his covenant God. And his Father. And Jesus Christ was his Redeemer. The Spirit was his sanctifier. He had all the grace on him, as well as the fact that he's an heir of the glory. Amen. The verse then says, and he urged him, and he took it. Now, this means that Esau took the gifts because, Jacob was, pressing on him, being persistent. Jacob told Esau God had blessed him abundantly, and he pled for Esau to allow him. Said, hey, brother, allow me to give you this gift. So Esau, being a good brother, he takes it. Verse 12. And he said, let us take our journey, and let us go, and I will go before thee. The verse says, and he said, let us take our journey, and let us go. He's speaking of going to where? To Seir, which is where Esau lives. He's inviting his brother Jacob to come along with him so that he can refresh him. And he says, and I will go before thee. Well, of course he would. He wanted to show him how to get there, right? To his palace, if you will, so that he could protect him from any danger. He could say, beside thee, couldn't he? Because I'm sure that he would want to walk alongside his brother so that he could keep pace, showing his brother great honor, great respect. They've been apart for, like I said, 20 years. He'd want to talk. While we're walking, pretty sure you get your brother, whoever you're going to walk along beside him, talk to him, hey man, how you been? Catch up, right? Verse 13. And he said unto him, my Lord knoweth that the children are tender, and the flocks and herds with young are with me, and if men should overdrive them one day, all the flocks will die. I know for a fact that you're going to need me to go into explaining here, because I had to dig myself. I'm going to reread this again. And he said unto him, my Lord knoweth the children are tender. Esau can tell just by looking that these children are young, as some would call them tender. There's no way that they could walk or ride very fast, right? Think about it. The oldest of these children would have been about 13, and the youngest was roughly 6, okay? The verse then says, and the flocks and the herds with young are with me. Esau saying that he would take charge of them. He would take care of them, if you will, especially with the circumstances that were on them. The ones that he's speaking of here are either pregnant, and the ones that have young are sucking too. The Targum of Onkelos and Jonathan, they make it clear that these are lambs and calves, and that they had just given birth, saying that they needed more attention and greater care. They're not able to travel long periods during the day. And he says, and if men should overtake them one day, all the flock will die. Now, again, this might confuse you. So, let me explain. He's saying that if him or one of the servants push them too hard, driving them too fast, if you will, even if it's just for a day, considering all that I said, they would be in danger of dying, from fatigue. He wanted Jacob to follow him home, and Jacob told him that if he drove them too hard, they'll die. They had peace now, and Jacob wanted to take his time with a large group. Saying that, look at the next verse, verse 14. Let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant, and I will lead on softly, according it's the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure until I come unto my Lord at Seir. Jacob is speaking here. He says, let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant. So Jacob's asking him in a very respectful way, don't worry about keeping pace with me, right? Go on ahead. Go with your men, get on ahead, and just allow me and my people to move at our own pace. Okay? The verse then says, and I will lead on softly, meaning slowly, gently, easily, step by step. The verse says, according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure. You could take this as according to the foot. Okay? The cattle that he calls work, because you see in Jacob's mind, it's his job to take care of them. They're his livelihood. And his children, those too. You see, he wanted to move gently, like a wise, careful, tender father would. Right? He says, until I come unto my Lord unto Seir. He tells Esau that he was going to come to Seir, which is where Esau lived. But for some reason, which I promise you we will get to, when you read the Bible, it doesn't make it sound like he does. So, did Jacob lie? I don't think so. I also don't think that he was tempted to. It seems like it would be dangerous for him to deny his brother on his borders. He had come there with 400 men, and if he had picked a fight with him, Esau could have destroyed him easily. I think that Jacob was honest here. I think he honestly wanted to just take his time and move his cattle slowly, allowing them to graze and not to push them too hard. So he told Esau, just go on ahead. So, let's move on, verse 15. And Esau said, let me now leave with thee some of the folk that are with me. And he said, what needeth it? Let me find grace in the sight of my Lord. So Esau tells him, Esau says, let me now leave with thee some of the folk that are with me. Now, doesn't that just make sense? Because he wanted to leave some of his men there so that they could show him the way and to also guard him as they traveled. Not only that, but these are Esau's men. And if they're with him, it would make him appear more honorable, right? When he's entering into Seir. The verse then says, and he said, what needeth it? Now, this is Jacob speaking there. He's saying he doesn't see the need for it. To me it makes it seem, if you will, like he knew the way to Seir already, and that he assumed there would be no danger. And honestly, why would he? Him and his brother are at peace now. And he goes on, let me find grace in the sight of my Lord. So Jacob, he had peace and goodwill with his brother now. And that's enough for him. He's begging him to just excuse me and don't leave me an escort. He's afraid that anything could happen. And if it did, of course, that would fracture their relationship, this newly mended relationship. Now, as we move on, we're going to see two places mentioned here. Seir and Succoth. Once Esau once his planned escort is dismissed, the two brothers, they part ways. Jacob says he's going to meet Esau again in Seir, but for some reason, we don't read about that. Instead, we see Jacob head to Succoth and then Shechem. If you know the geography, I'm going to point this out to you. Succoth is east of Jordan, about 10 miles east of Shechem. That's about 65 miles north of Jerusalem. It's located between Mounts Ebal and Gerizim. Verse 16. So Esau returned that day on his way unto Seir. Simple. We're going to read it again. Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. So Esau took leave of Jacob. And sadly, when you look at what the Bible shows us, it seems like this is the same day. So he went out there, he met with Jacob, and he left. He headed home to Seir. Look at the story. It doesn't say if he arrived the same day or not. But this had to be longer than a day's journey. And we see Esau went to Seir, or as Obadiah called it, Edom. And Jacob, he went to Succoth, which, if you have been following us long enough here on Sermons in the Park, you know that means booths. 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 And like I said, it's located east of the Jordan, north of the Jabbok. Esau had offered to leave some men there so that they could help Jacob find his way, and Jacob told him he did not need them. And Jacob told Esau, of course, that he was happy that his brother forgave him. Moving on, verse 17. And Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built him a house and made booths for his cattle. Therefore the name of the place is called Succoth. Now, read that part again. And Jacob journeyed to Succoth. Now, I want to pause right here. And I want to mention something. So many people have said that Jacob did not go to Seir and visit his brother Esau. In fact, you might have noticed that I kind of hinted at it. Okay? Did the Bible say that Jacob did not go visit Esau? In this whole reading here, this whole chapter, did we once read the words, he did not go visit Esau? He did not go to Seir. No. We did not read those words. So, why is it not 100% possible that Jacob went to Seir, visited Esau, stayed there for some time, even if it was just a short period of time? Why is it not possible he did? There's no reason to say he didn't. It's very, very possible that he did. Anyway, Succoth is on the other side of the Jordan, and It was named Succoth in anticipation for what we just read. At this time, there was no city there, or at least not one named Succoth. That was later. It was in the valley, and it belonged to the king of Heshbon. It was given to the tribe of Gad in Joshua chapter 13, verse 27. In the valley Beth Aram and Beth Nimrah and Succoth and Zaphon, the rest of the kingdom of Sihon, king of Heshbon, Jordan and his border, even unto the edge of the sea of Shinnereth on the other side Jordan, eastward. It was mentioned with Penuel and was not far from it. Take a look at Judges chapter 8, verse 8. And he went up thence to Penuel, and spake unto them likewise, and the men of Penuel answered him as the men of Succoth had answered him. It was it was said to be about 2 miles from Penuel, right? But it's easy to believe and very possible that it was actually further away. The verse then says, and built him a house, and made booths for his cattle, built him a house for him and his family to live in, right? And booths, or tents, if you will, for his servants and his shepherds, as well as the cattle that they took care of. Now, some for one and some for the others, right? This shows us that he had plans. He planned to stay there for a long, long time. The Targum of Jonathan says that he actually stayed there for a year. Jarkey says that it was 18 months, a winter and 2 summers. But again, we cannot be certain, can we? Right? Because the Bible gives us no time period at all. The verse then tells us, therefore the name of the place is called Succoth. Why? Because of the booths, or tents, if you will, that he built there. And that's where that word comes from, Succoth, which means booth, okay? These may make them sound small, but I want you to realize that these are not what we think of. These booths would have been more like barns, okay? So, moving along, verse 18. And Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram, and pitched his tent before the city. Now, Shalem, that actually means that he came safely to Shechem. All right. Now, it's possible that these are the last, or at least I should say, 10 years in Succoth before he then went to Shechem. This was because, let's remember, he was coming back there. He was coming back there so he could fulfill that covenant promise. Look at chapter 28, verse 15. And behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land, for I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee. So, and then what do we see? He erected an altar there, just like Abraham did when he arrived there back in chapter 12, verse 7. Sorry, my kids are being really loud, and there's nothing I can do short of going back there and yelling for them to stop. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said unto thy seed will I give this land, and there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. This was most likely around 1908 BC. We saw a reference to Jacob fulfilling the vow that was made at Bethel when he looked to God for a safe return to Canaan. He said that, when he arrived, he would tithe of his possessions. Now, we can presume that he fulfilled this pledge right there at Shechem, or maybe later when he arrived in Bethel. When you look at it, when he bought this land at Shechem, this would have been the second foothold of Abraham's family in the Promised Land. 50 years later, before he died in Egypt, we actually see Jacob give this piece of land right here that we're reading about to Joseph. Look at chapter 48, verse 22. Moreover, I have given to thee one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the land of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow. And we see his bones laid there 400 years later in Joshua chapter 24, verse 32. And the bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel brought up out of Egypt, buried they in Shechem in a parcel of ground which Jacob bought of the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver, and it became the inheritance of the children of Joseph. Also, on this piece of land that we're talking about, we see Jacob dig a well that would later become the scene of one of the important moments in Jesus' ministry 1900 years later, in John chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. Then cometh he to the city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near to the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well, and it was about the 6th hour. Now this, of course, is when the lady comes and Jesus asks her for the water. We know that story. Now, what about the location? Shechem's location. Well, archaeologists have identified it. They identified it as being Tel Balata, which is at the eastern end of the pass between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. And that location was very strategic. It controls all the roads through that country. Now, well, during ancient times. All right, it was excavated extensively by a man named G.E. Wright between 1956 in 1962. And during these excavations, what he discovered were small permanent settlements that were there prior to 1800 BC. And this was when Hyksos built a large fortress there, who was also, they were also semi-nomadic. And they were so anxious to form the alliance with Jacob. Okay. Now, also there were Canaanite fortresses there. There was a temple of Baal-berith. It was also built there, and we read about that actually in Judges chapter 9, verse 4. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baalberith, wherewith Abimelech hired vain and light persons which followed him. Now, this, of course, was later destroyed. It was destroyed by Abimelech, Gideon's son, in chapter 9, verses 46 and 49. I shouldn't have closed that section, should I? Of course, you know, if you guys go watch, listen to or go to YouTube channel and watch. I have a whole section of just on these chapters you can go listen to. Chapter 9, verse 46 through 49, it says, And when all the men of the tower of Shechem heard that, they entered into a hold of the house of the god Berith, and it was told Abimelech that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. And Abimelech gat him up on the Mount Zalmon, he and all the people that were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand, and cut down a bow from the trees, and took it and laid it on his shoulder, and said unto the people that were with him, What ye have seen me do, make haste, and do as I have done. And all the people likewise cut down every man his bow, and followed Abimelech, and put them to the hold, and set the hold on fire upon them, so that all the men of the tower of Shechem died also, about 1,000 men and women. Okay, now, back to our verse. Before we move on from this verse, I do want to point something out. Now, remember when I said that it's very possible that the verse starts off with Jacob peacefully coming to Shechem. And that's because of the word Shalem. That means peaceful or secure. In fact, if you look at some translations of the Bible, they actually refuse to capitalize this word. So it's very clear that he peacefully came to Shechem. Now, I want to talk a little about what I believe here. I think this verse right here, this verse that we're reading, verse 17, I think it was flipped. I think that they both are describing the exact same thing. I think that first we see Jacob come to Padan Aram. I think we see that, right? And he pitches a tent there. He bought the land. He built some barns. He built a home, right? Why? Because if you buy yourself some land and you build a home, what are you doing? You're settling down, right? Anyway, moving on, verse 19. And he bought a parcel of a field where he had spread his tents at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money? Again, this is self-explanatory. But we're going to look at it. We're going to look at one part. Just a little bit, I promise. It says that Jacob bought a parcel of a field. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the purchase of this piece of land right here is the second that we have seen legally bought in the time of for the line of Abraham in the Promised Land. Anyway, we should take a look at Genesis chapter 23, verses 17 and 18. And the field of Ephron, which was in Machpelah, which was before Mamre, the field and the cave which was therein, and all the trees that were in the field, that were in all the borders round about, were made sure unto Abraham for a possession in the presence of the children of Heth, before all that went in at the gate of his city. Now flip to chapter 25. We're going to look at verses 9 and 10. And his son Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, which is before Mamre, the field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Heth, there was Abraham buried, and Sarah his wife. But you see, the land was not theirs because they bought it anyway. It was theirs because God was the one who owned it, and God was the one who gave it to them for their home. Take a look at some verses with me. Leviticus chapter 25. We're going to look at verse 23. The land shall not be sold forever, for the land is mine, for ye are strangers and sojourners with me. You see? So, here we are. We're at the last verse in the chapter, verse 20, and it reads, "And he erected there an altar and called it El Elohe Israel." The verse tells us, right? It says, and he erected there an altar. This is the same place where earlier in chapter 12, verse 6 and 7, we read that Abraham built an altar. And Abram passed through the land unto the place of Shechem, and to the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was then in the land. And the Lord appeared unto Abram, and said, Unto thy seed will I give the land. And there builded he an altar unto the Lord, who appeared unto him. So we read that Abraham built the altar there, right? Now Jacob also marks the place with a new name. This one actually incorporates his own new name that we read about back in chapter 32. God, the God of Israel. That's what this name means. El Elohe Israel. God, the God of Israel. This actually declares that Jacob worshipped the Mighty One. Now Israel, of course, foreshadows its use as a nation that they would become known as, right? Even when it consists of not much more than the house of Jacob. Look at this verse. Look at this verse that we will talk about more next week. Genesis chapter 34, verse 7. And the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved, and they were very wroth, because he had wrought folly in Israel in lying with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to be done. That name, El Elohe Israel, shows us by Jacob using his own new name, Israel, that El was his God. Like I said, it translates to a mighty God is the God of Israel. He is, of course, remembering that God preserved his life when he saw his brother Esau. Him raising this altar here is him recognizing that Almighty God protected him, blessed him, throughout everything that we've read right here in this chapter. Well, actually, let's face it, up until this chapter. Amen. Again, I want to thank you all for joining me here. Like I said, it's always a blessing just to get to come here and or stand here, I should say, and preach the gospel to you all. I pray that the Lord just continues to bless each and every one of you. Like I said, it's always a blessing to just stand here and preach with you and talk to you all. You guys message me on Facebook, talk to me. I would love to just to have fellowship with you. It's always awesome to do this. And in fact, next week, I think it's maybe this coming Saturday, I've got a wedding I got to do for someone. I love doing that type of stuff. So thank you all for joining me here again. I pray the Lord continues to bless and keep you, and I hope to see you all.
You have been listening to Sermons in the Park with Reverend Jamie McCaskill. Be sure to follow us on YouTube, BitChute, and Rumble. And as always, thank you for listening.